A man paid for a poor widow's food, thinking it was just kindness until the next day when a stranger knocked on his door with life-changing news. Consider liking this video if you enjoy our content. Your story starts now. Rain pelted against the windows of Barton's Bakery, one of the few establishments in the neighborhood that still maintained its old-world charm despite the gentrification sweeping through the area. Nathan Reynolds stood in line, his worn leather jacket damp from the downpour as he awaited his turn at the counter. At 30, his face already carried lines that spoke of a life marked by both joy and profound loss. It had been 18 months since Sarah's passing, 18 months of learning to navigate a world suddenly emptied of her laugh, her touch, her presence at the breakfast table on Sunday mornings. The days had blurred together since then. Wake up, work, come home to an apartment that never quite felt warm enough anymore, repeat. His job as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm kept him afloat financially, barely, but did little to fill the void that had opened inside him. The economic recession gripping the city had hit the creative sector particularly hard, and Nathan had watched helplessly as his savings dwindled with each passing month. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at his watch. 20 minutes until he needed to be back at work. The line moved forward, and Nathan's attention drifted to a woman and child who had just entered the bakery, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the subtle scent of rain. The woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, had an exhaustion about her that seemed bone-deep. The little girl beside her, no more than 9 or 10, clutched her mother's hand, her eyes wide as they took in the displays of bread and pastries. They joined the line behind Nathan, and he couldn't help but notice the worn edges of the woman's coat, the careful way she counted coins in her palm when she thought no one was looking. He recognized the calculations happening behind her eyes, the mental arithmetic of poverty, the silent tallying of needs versus wants that he'd become all too familiar with himself. When Nathan's turn came, he ordered his usual, a simple ham, cheese sandwich and black coffee, paid and stepped aside to wait. The woman and child approached the counter next. "Just a loaf of sourdough and a small milk, please," the woman said, her voice soft but clear. The cashier, a young man with a bored expression, rang up the items. "That's 8.75s. Nathan watched as the woman's face fell slightly. She recounted the coins in her hand, then looked back up at the cashier. "I'm sorry, I only have 7.30. Could I just get the bread then?" Before the cashier could respond, a gruff voice cut through from the back of the store. "Again, Olivia? This isn't a charity." The bakery owner, Gerald Barton, emerged from behind a display case, his substantial frame clothed in a flour-dusted apron, his expression one of practiced disdain. "I've told you before, if you can't afford something, don't waste our time." The little girl shrank against her mother's side. The woman, Olivia, flushed deeply, her posture stiffening as she became aware of the other customers watching the interaction. "I'm sorry, Mr. Barton. We'll just take the bread." Her voice was steady, but Nathan could see the slight tremor in her hands as she placed the coins on the counter. Something shifted in Nathan at that moment, a dormant part of him stirring to life after months of numbness. Without fully realizing what he was doing, he stepped forward. "I've got it," he said, placing $2 on the counter. "The bread and the milk." Olivia turned to him, surprise evident in her eyes, a warm brown that reminded Nathan of autumn leaves. "That's very kind, but you don't need to." "It's no problem, really." Nathan offered her a small smile, the first genuine one he could remember giving in months. Gerald Barton snorted derisively. "Playing the hero, are we? You're just encouraging her. She's in here every week with some sad story or another." The shame that flashed across Olivia's face ignited something in Nathan, a flicker of outrage that burned through the grey fog that had enveloped him since Sarah's death. "Excuse me?" Nathan turned to face the owner, his voice low but firm. "All she's trying to do is buy bread and milk for her daughter. I don't see how that deserves this kind of treatment." Barton's face reddened. "Listen, buddy, you don't know the half of it. These people come in here, expect handouts." "These people," Nathan echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. "She's trying to pay for her food, not asking for anything free." The store had grown quiet, other customers watching the confrontation with uncomfortable fascination. The little girl tugged at her mother's hand, clearly distressed. "It's fine," Olivia said, her voice tight. "Emily and I can go somewhere else." She reached for the coins she'd placed on the counter. "No!" Nathan's response surprised even himself with its force. "No, you shouldn't have to go anywhere else." He turned to the young cashier who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "The bread and milk, please, and whatever else they'd like." The cashier glanced nervously at his boss, then back at Nathan, before quickly bagging the items. Nathan added a chocolate croissant to the order with a nod toward Emily, whose eyes widened slightly at the unexpected treat. Gerald Barton muttered something under his breath but retreated to the back of the store, the momentary confrontation apparently not worth the disruption to his business. Nathan paid, ignoring the stares of the other customers, and handed the bag to Olivia. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Perhaps pride, perhaps wariness at accepting help from a stranger. "You're welcome." Nathan hesitated, then added, "I'm Nathan, by the way." "Olivia?" she replied, though he already knew this from Barton's admonishment. "And this is my daughter, Emily." The little girl, who had been partly hiding behind her mother, gave him a small, shy wave. Nathan smiled at her. "Nice to meet you, Emily." He turned back to Olivia. "Look, I don't mean to overstep, but that was completely out of line. Has he always treated you like that?" Olivia's expression shuttered slightly. "It's fine, we're used to it." "How you shouldn't have to be," Nathan replied, aware that his coffee and sandwich were now ready at the counter but making no move to retrieve them. "No one should speak to you, to anyone that way." Something in Olivia's posture softened slightly. "It's just the way things are sometimes, but thank you really for the food and for standing up for us. Not many people would." An idea formed in Nathan's mind then, spontaneous, perhaps foolish, but somehow feeling like the most right thing he'd thought in months. "Listen, I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to help. Not just with this, but maybe there's something more I could do." Olivia's expression grew cautious. "That's kind, but we're managing. We don't need charity." "It's not charity," Nathan said quickly. He struggled to articulate what he meant. "It's solidarity, maybe. I've been going through some tough times myself, and I know how much even a small gesture can mean. Sometimes the system seems designed to keep people down, and the only way through is to help each other." Emily tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, we're going to be late for my doctor's appointment." Olivia nodded, glancing at her watch with a flash of anxiety. "We should go." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. She scribbled something quickly and handed it to Nathan. "My number. If you're serious about wanting to help, maybe we can talk. But I need to be clear. We're not looking for handouts, just maybe a friend." Nathan took the paper, feeling as though something significant had just occurred, though he couldn't quite name what. "I understand. And I meant what I said." With a final nod of thanks, Olivia took Emily's hand, and they left the bakery, disappearing into the rain-soaked street outside. Nathan stood for a moment, watching the space where they had been, the slip of paper with Olivia's number feeling weighted with possibility in his hand. His phone buzzed with a reminder. He was now officially late for his afternoon meeting. As he hurried to collect his food and head back to work, Nathan realized that for the first time in 18 months, he felt fully present in his own life, anchored, not by grief, but by the simple, powerful act of connecting with another human being's struggle. That night, in his quiet apartment, Nathan sat at his small kitchen table, a half-eaten container of takeout pushed aside as he stared at the phone number Olivia had given him. The encounter at the bakery kept replaying in his mind. The little girl's wide eyes, Olivia's quiet dignity in the face of humiliation, the burn of righteous anger he'd felt rise within him. It had been so long since he'd felt anything that strongly. After Sarah died of cancer, Nathan had moved through the world, as if underwater. Sounds muffled, colors dulled, everything at a remove. Their friends had tried at first, inviting him to dinners he couldn't bring himself to attend, leaving voicemails that went unreturned until, gradually, they stopped trying. He didn't blame them. Grief had made him a ghost in his own life. But today something had shifted. The simple act of standing up for Olivia and Emily had broken through the numbness, reminded him that he was still capable of making a difference, however small, in someone else's life. It wasn't much, just a few dollars, a few words of defense, but it had felt like waking up. Before he could overthink it, Nathan picked up his phone and dialed Olivia's number. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice cautious. "Hello? Olivia? It's Nathan, from the bakery today." A slight pause. "Yes, I remember. I hope it's not too late to call." He glanced at the clock. Just past 8. "No, it's fine. Emily's just finishing her homework." Another pause. "Thank you again for what you did today." "Anyone would have done the same," Nathan said, though he knew that wasn't true. Most people would have looked away, pretended not to notice, as he himself might have done only months ago. "No," Olivia replied, a hint of firmness entering her voice. "They wouldn't have, but you did." Nathan swallowed, unsure how to respond to her directness. "I meant what I said about wanting to help. I don't know exactly how, but maybe we could meet somewhere, talk about it. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation." The silence that followed stretched long enough that Nathan wondered if she'd hung up. Then why? The question was simple but loaded with understandable suspicion. Why would you want to help us? You don't even know us. It was a fair question, one Nathan hadn't fully answered for himself yet. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. But today, when I saw how that bakery owner treated you, something just clicked. I've been sleepwalking through my life for a while now, and this felt like waking up. Like maybe the way forward isn't to keep withdrawing from the world, but to engage with it, to try to make it a little better where I can." Another silence, this one contemplative. Finally, Olivia spoke again. "There's a coffee shop on West 52nd called Morning Light. I drop Emily at school at 8:15 tomorrow. I could meet you there around 8:30 before my shift starts at the hospital." Relief washed over Nathan. "That sounds perfect. I'll be there." "Nathan," Olivia added, her voice taking on an edge of resolve, "I need to be clear about something. I'm not looking for a savior. Emily and I have been on our own since her father died 3 years ago, and we've managed. It hasn't been easy, especially with medical bills and rent increases, but we're not charity cases." "I understand," Nathan replied, respecting the boundary she was drawing. "I'm not looking to save anyone. Maybe just to connect, to be useful somehow." "Okay." Her voice softened slightly. "I'll see you tomorrow then." After they hung up, Nathan sat for a long time at his kitchen table, feeling as though he'd just stepped onto a path without knowing where it led, but knowing somehow that it was the right direction. Morning Light Cafe was busier than Nathan had expected for a weekday morning, filled with commuters grabbing coffee before heading to their offices in the nearby high-rises. He secured a small table near the back and ordered 2 coffees, then waited, trying to ignore the nervous energy buzzing through him. It had been a long time since he'd made plans to meet anyone outside of work, and he felt oddly out of practice at basic social interaction. When Olivia walked in at 8:35, her hair damp from the continuing rain and her cheeks flushed from the cold, Nathan found himself sitting up straighter. She spotted him and made her way over, removing her wet coat as she sat down. "Sorry I'm a little late," she said, accepting the coffee he slid toward her with a grateful nod. "Emily couldn't find her science project this morning. Crisis averted, though. It was under her bed the whole time." Nathan smiled, struck by the ordinary domesticity of her explanation. "No problem, I'm just glad you came." Olivia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, studying him with eyes that seemed to take in everything. Without the immediate stress of the bakery incident, Nathan noticed details about her he'd missed before: the slight silver streak in her dark hair, the delicate lines at the corners of her eyes that deepened when she offered him a tentative smile. "So," she said after taking a sip of her coffee, "you wanted to talk about helping somehow." Nathan nodded, suddenly feeling the awkwardness of what he was proposing. "I know it sounds strange. I'm not even sure what I'm offering exactly. It's just—" He paused, considering his words carefully. "Yesterday, when I saw how that bakery owner treated you, It made me realize how many barriers there are for people just trying to get by, and I've been thinking that maybe instead of just feeling helpless about it, I could actually do something. Even if it's small. Olivia regarded him thoughtfully. What do you know about me, Nathan, about my situation? Not much, he admitted. I know you have a daughter, Emily. I know you work at a hospital. I know that buying bread and milk shouldn't be a source of humiliation. She nodded slowly. I'm a nurse's aide at Mount Sinai. I used to be a full registered nurse, but after my husband, David, died, I had to cut back my hours to be there for Emily. She has juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. It's manageable, but it means a lot of doctor visits, and sometimes she has flare-ups that keep her home from school. She took another sip of her coffee. The reduced hours meant I lost my benefits. We get by on my salary and what's left of David's life insurance, but it doesn't leave much room for error. One unexpected bill, one missed shift, and the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. The matter-of-fact way she described her precarious situation struck Nathan deeply. He thought of his own financial struggles after Sarah's death, the medical bills that had drained their savings, the insurance company that had fought him on every claim, but at least he'd had a full-time job with benefits to fall back on. I understand more than you might think, he said quietly. My wife Sarah died 18 months ago. Cancer. The medical costs. He shook his head, not wanting to make this about his pain. Anyway, I know what it's like to have the ground disappear from under you. Something in Olivia's expression shifted, a recognition of shared experience that bridged the gap between them more effectively than any offer of help could have done. I'm sorry about your wife, she said softly, and I'm sorry about your husband. Nathan took a breath. Look, I'm not proposing to solve all your problems. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But maybe there are ways I could make things a little easier. I'm good with computers. I could help Emily with homework or look over your bills to see if there are any programs or assistance you might qualify for, or even just be an extra pair of hands sometimes. Olivia studied him, her expression a mix of wariness and something that might have been hope. Why would you do that for people you just met? It was the same question she'd asked on the phone, and this time Nathan had a clearer answer. Because it gives me purpose. Because after Sarah died, I cut myself off from everyone and everything, and it hasn't helped. Because maybe we both need someone in our corner right now. After a long moment, Olivia nodded. Emily has a doctor's appointment next Tuesday afternoon. I usually have to take unpaid time off for it, but if you were serious about helping, I could take her, Nathan offered immediately. If she'd be comfortable with that, and if you trust me to, of course. I don't know if I'm ready for that level of trust yet, Olivia admitted, but maybe you could come with us. An extra adult in the room is always helpful, especially with a 9-year-old who's scared of needles. Nathan felt a smile spread across his face, the second genuine one in as many days. I'd be honored. This doesn't mean I'm accepting any financial help, Olivia clarified quickly. This is just a friend helping a friend. Of course, Nathan agreed. Friends. As they continued talking, the morning light strengthening outside the cafe windows, Nathan felt a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was the warmth of connection, of purpose, the first crack in the ice that had encased his heart since Sarah's death. Whatever came of this unusual friendship, he knew with certainty that something important had begun in that bakery yesterday, something that might just save them both. Mom, is Nathan your boyfriend? Emily's question came out of nowhere as Olivia tucked her daughter into bed that Tuesday night, nearly 2 weeks after Nathan had accompanied them to Emily's doctor's appointment. Olivia nearly dropped the book she was holding. What? No, honey. Nathan is just a friend who's helping us out. Emily looked unconvinced, her small face solemn in the warm glow of her bedside lamp. Maggie at school says when a man comes to your house for dinner and helps with stuff, it means he's a boyfriend. Olivia sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. She should have anticipated this. In the short time since Nathan had entered their lives, his presence had already become somewhat routine. After that first doctor's appointment, where he'd not only kept Emily distracted with silly stories, but had also taken detailed notes about her medication schedule, he'd offered to help in other ways. He'd fixed their perpetually leaking kitchen, sink, picked up groceries when Olivia was working late shifts, and twice now had joined them for dinner, bringing ingredients and cooking alongside Olivia while Emily did her homework at the kitchen table. "Relationships are more complicated than that, sweetheart," Olivia explained gently. "Nathan is a good person who wants to help us because that's the kind of person he is. And we help him too, in our way." "How do we help him?" Emily asked, genuinely curious. Olivia thought about the gradual change she'd observed in Nathan over the past weeks, how the shadows in his eyes seemed lighter, how his smile came more readily. "I think we give him company. Everyone needs people in their lives who care about them." Emily considered this, then nodded sagely. "He was sad before, wasn't he? Because his wife died like Daddy did." "Yes," Olivia confirmed, sometimes surprised by her daughter's perceptiveness. "He was very sad. Maybe still is, in some ways." "I like when he comes over," Emily declared, pulling her stuffed rabbit closer. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby, and he knows how to make mac and cheese the good way." Olivia smiled, leaning down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "I like when he comes over too." Now time for sleep. Later, after Emily had drifted off, Olivia sat at their small kitchen table with a cup of tea, turning over her daughter's question in her mind. Was there something developing between her and Nathan beyond friendship? The thought both frightened and intrigued her. After David died, she'd built walls around her heart, focusing all her energy on Emily and survival. The idea of letting someone new in felt like a risk she wasn't sure she could afford to take. And yet, there was something about Nathan, his quiet strength, his genuine kindness without expectation, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed at Emily's jokes, that had begun to carve a space in her carefully ordered world. Her phone lit up with a text message, just checking in to see how Emily's doing after the new medication. "Any side effects?" Olivia found herself smiling as she typed back, "So far so good. Doctor says we should know in a few days if it's helping." "Thank you for checking," his response came quickly. "Of course, let me know if you need anything. I'm here." Those 3 simple words, "I'm here," held more weight than they should have. In a life defined by struggle and absence, by systems and people who had repeatedly let her down, the steady presence of someone who simply showed up, without fanfare or expectation, felt revolutionary. Olivia set down her phone, wrapping her hands around her mug as a strange mixture of hope and fear washed over her. Whatever was developing between them, she couldn't deny that Nathan Reynolds had already changed something fundamental in her. Life had reminded her that even in a world that often seemed designed to break people like her, connection and kindness could still thrive in unexpected places. Gerald Barton prided himself on running his bakery with razor-sharp efficiency and what he liked to call old-fashioned values, by which he meant an unyielding approach to business that his father had instilled in him. There were rules to success. In America, work hard, pay your way, and never, under any circumstances, give handouts to those who hadn't earned them. It was a philosophy that had served him well, transforming the modest bakery he'd inherited into one of the neighborhood's most profitable establishments. So when Nathan Reynolds walked into Barton's bakery on a brisk Thursday morning, the same troublemaker who had caused a scene over that Williams woman and her daughter a month ago, Gerald immediately tensed, preparing for another confrontation. To his surprise, Reynolds approached the counter calmly, ordered a coffee and a loaf of sourdough, then took a seat at one of the small tables near the window. Gerald watched him suspiciously as he opened a laptop and began typing, seemingly settled in for the morning. After 20 minutes of this unremarkable behavior, Gerald's curiosity got the better of him. He approached the table, wiping his hands on his apron. "You planning on buying anything else, or just taking up space?" he asked, his tone making it clear that paying customers were expected to keep buying or move along. Nathan looked up from his screen, his expression neutral. "Just working for a bit. I've got a meeting nearby in an hour." Gerald grunted, unsatisfied with the response, but unable to find reasonable grounds for complaint. The morning rush had ended, and the bakery was only half full. "Fine, but we're not a library." Nathan's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Noted." Gerald turned to leave, but Nathan's voice stopped him. "Actually, Mr. Barton, I've been meaning to speak with you. Gerald turned back, narrowing his eyes. About? Olivia Williams, the woman from a few weeks ago. Gerald's expression hardened. What about her? I was wondering if you'd be open to a proposition. Nathan closed his laptop, giving Gerald his full attention. I understand running a business means watching your bottom line, but I also think there might be a way to help people like Olivia without it costing you anything. Gerald crossed his arms, skeptical but curious despite himself. I'm listening. What would you think about a community tab? People who can afford it could pay a few dollars extra, which would go toward helping customers who come up short. It wouldn't cost you anything. In fact, it might actually bring in more business from people who appreciate the community spirit. Gerald snorted. A charity basket in my bakery? That's not how I run my business. Not charity, Nathan corrected calmly. Community. People helping each other through tough times, the way neighbors used to. And I suppose you've got this all figured out? Gerald's tone was dismissive, but something in Nathan's steady gaze made him uncomfortable, made him remember, briefly, and unwillingly, his own mother's struggle to keep food on the table after his father had first opened the bakery, how the previous owner of the building had sometimes looked the other way on late rent. Actually, I've been talking to some of the other businesses in the neighborhood, Nathan said. The bookstore on the corner, the hardware store 2 blocks down. They're both considering similar programs. It's tough times for everyone right now, but especially for families like Olivia's, who are one emergency away from not making rent. Gerald shifted his weight, irritation mingling with a reluctant sense of recognition. The Williams woman wasn't the only customer who counted pennies at his counter. The neighborhood had changed over the years, becoming at once more affluent and more unequal. And what's in it for you? Gerald asked abruptly. You sweet on her or something? Nathan held his gaze, unflinching. What's in it for me is living in a community where people look out for each other, where a little girl doesn't have to feel ashamed because her mum can't afford milk that week. Gerald looked away first, uncomfortable with the naked sincerity in Reynolds's voice. I'll think about it, he muttered finally, not committing to anything but not dismissing the idea outright either. Nathan nodded, opening his laptop again. That's all I'm asking. As Gerald walked back to the counter, he found himself unsettled by the interaction. He'd built his identity around being a hard-nosed businessman who didn't suffer fools or freeloaders. But Reynolds' words had stirred something he'd long suppressed, a memory of his mother's grateful tears when neighbors had brought food during his father's brief unemployment, his father's quiet shame as he'd accepted help he couldn't repay at that moment, but would later return tenfold. Behind the counter, Gerald busied himself with organizing receipts, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. He wasn't running a charity. He was running a business. Still, as the day progressed, he found himself watching his customers more closely, noting the elderly man who always ordered the cheapest coffee, the young woman with a baby who often checked her wallet before ordering, the construction worker, who sometimes came in with exact change counted out. People he'd seen 1,000 times, but never really seen at all. By Saturday morning, a small chalkboard had appeared on the bakery counter. Community tab available. It read in Gerald's precise handwriting, pay it forward or pay when you can. When Nathan came in that day and saw the sign, the brief nod he exchanged with Gerald contained no triumph, no smugness, only simple recognition of a small barrier quietly dismantled, a tiny crack in a much larger wall. Olivia stood in the hallway outside her apartment door, frozen with her key halfway to the lock. From inside, she could hear Emily's delighted laughter floating through the door, followed by Nathan's deeper voice, making what sounded like cartoon sound effects. The unexpected domesticity of the moment, coming home to laughter rather than an empty apartment, caught her off guard, sending a complicated wave of emotions through her that she wasn't quite ready to examine. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open to find Emily and Nathan hunched over a complex Lego structure on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered pieces. Emily looked up, her face glowing with excitement. "Mom, Nathan's helping me build a hospital for my science project. Look, it even has an elevator for patients," she demonstrated by moving a small Lego figure up and down between floors. That's amazing, sweetie, Olivia said, setting down her purse and the groceries she'd picked up on the way home from her shift. Where did all these Legos come from? Nathan stood, brushing dust from his knees. I hope you don't mind. I still had mine from when I was a kid. They were just sitting in a storage box at my place. Nathan says they're antiques now, Emily added importantly, from the olden days. The 1990s aren't exactly the olden days, Nathan protested with a laugh, but thanks for making me feel ancient. Olivia smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. The science project on community helpers had been stressing Emily for days, and here was Nathan, not only helping but bringing resources that Olivia could never have afforded herself. Legos weren't cheap, and a set this extensive would have been completely out of reach. Thank you, she said simply, meeting his eyes across the room. He shrugged, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. It's nothing. They were just gathering dust. But they both knew it wasn't nothing. In the 2 months since Nathan had entered their lives, these moments had accumulated. Small kindnesses, practical help, the gradual weaving of his presence into the fabric of their days. Nathan picking Emily up from school when Olivia had to work late. Nathan teaching Emily how to use design software on his laptop to make a birthday card for her friend. Nathan bringing over soup when both Olivia and Emily had caught the flu that had swept through Emily's class. And it wasn't one-sided, Olivia reminded herself. She'd helped him too, proofreading proposals for his freelance design work, lending an ear when he'd struggled through the anniversary of Sarah's death, inviting him for dinners so he wouldn't eat alone. They'd developed a rhythm, a mutuality that went beyond charity or obligation. How was work? Nathan asked as Emily returned to her Lego construction. Olivia sighed, moving to the kitchen to unpack the groceries. Nathan followed, automatically, reaching to help her. Exhausting. We're short-staffed again and there's talk of more budget cuts coming. I'm sorry, he said, and she knew he meant it. Anything I can do? She shook her head, then paused. Actually, can you stay for dinner? I'm too tired to cook, but I don't want to waste these groceries. I'd be happy to cook, Nathan offered immediately. I make a mean pasta primavera. You don't have to. I want to, he said simply. Let me do this. Olivia relented, feeling the weight of the day begin to lift from her shoulders. As Nathan moved around her small kitchen with casual familiarity, she was struck by how natural his presence felt, how seamlessly he had integrated himself into their lives. It should have frightened her, this dependence they were developing. Instead, she found herself watching him, the careful way he chopped vegetables, the genuine interest with which he asked Emily about her day, and feeling not fear, but a tentative warmth spreading through her chest. Later, after dinner had been eaten and Emily was in bed, Olivia and Nathan sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, a comfortable silence between them. Nathan, Olivia began hesitantly, what are we doing? He looked up, his expression open. What do you mean? This. She gestured vaguely between them. You're here 3 or 4 times a week. You're helping with Emily, with bills, with everything. At first it was just supposed to be occasional help, and now... She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the question pressing on her heart. Nathan set down his mug, his expression thoughtful. I guess we're building something. A friendship, definitely. Maybe something more. The last part came out as a question, his usual confidence wavering. Olivia felt her heart quicken. That's what I'm afraid of, she admitted, quietly. I haven't let anyone get close since David died. It's been easier that way, safer. For you or for Emily? Both, neither. Olivia sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know. Emily adores you, and that terrifies me. What if this doesn't work out? What if you decide we're too much responsibility? She's already lost one important man in her life. Nathan reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers, offering connection but not demanding it. I can't promise you that everything will work out perfectly. No one can. But I can promise you that I don't see you or Emily as a responsibility or a charity case. You're... He paused, searching for the right words. You're the best part of my day, both of you. When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me, that I'd just go through the motions for the rest of my life. Then I met you, and for the first time I started thinking about the future again." Olivia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple honesty in his voice. Slowly, deliberately, she moved her hand the final inch, to meet his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too," he admitted, his fingers warm against hers. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared just means it matters." As they sat there, hands joined across the small kitchen table, Olivia felt something shift between them, a step across a threshold they'd been approaching for weeks. Whatever came next wouldn't be easy. There would be complications, adjustments, the delicate balance of merging their wounded hearts and separate lives. But sitting there in the quiet of her kitchen, Olivia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of it, of a future where connection trumped fear, where trust could be rebuilt, and where the family she and Emily had made of two might somehow, miraculously, have room to grow. The first community meeting was held in the basement of St. Mark's Church on a humid June evening, 6 months after Nathan had first stepped forward in Barton's bakery. What had begun as a simple idea, the community tab at the bakery, had gradually expanded, rippling outward like a stone dropped in still water. The hardware store had implemented a similar program, then the laundromat, then the corner grocery. Nathan had reached out to local business owners one by one, not with demands or accusations, but with quiet conversations about community resilience and mutual aid. Some had been receptive immediately, others, like Gerald Barton, had required more convincing. But slowly, steadily the idea had spread. Nathan stood at the front of the room now, surveying the crowd with a mixture of nervousness and pride. Nearly 50 people had turned up, small business owners, residents from the apartment complexes that lined the neighborhood, social workers, teachers from Emily's school, even a representative from the city council who had heard about their grassroots initiative and wanted to learn more. Olivia sat in the front row, Emily beside her, both offering encouraging smiles as Nathan cleared his throat and began to speak. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "6 months ago I witnessed something that many of us have seen too often, someone being shamed for not having enough money for basic necessities." He glanced at Olivia, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. "It made me realize how many invisible barriers exist in our community, how many people are just one missed paycheck away from crisis, and how the systems that should support us often end up dividing us instead." As Nathan outlined the Community Tab program and its expansion, he could feel the energy in the room shifting, from polite interest to engaged participation. People began raising their hands, sharing their own experiences, offering suggestions for how to grow the initiative further. "What about a community resource directory?" suggested the owner of the local bookstore. "Something that lists all the available services, food pantries, job training, healthcare options, in one place?" "And what about childcare swaps?" added a young mother from Olivia's apartment building. "So many of us are stuck working shifts that don't align with school hours, and professional childcare is unaffordable. We could create a time bank," offered an elderly man who Nathan recognized as a regular at Barton's. "I might not have much money, but I've got skills to share, carpentry, basic plumbing, and there are things I need help with too, like getting to doctor's appointments or learning to use my new smartphone." Ideas built upon ideas, the conversation flowing organically as neighbors who had perhaps passed each other for years without speaking began to connect over shared challenges and potential solutions. Nathan stepped back, letting the discussion take on a life of its own, feeling a deep satisfaction that transcended his initial impulse to help one family. At some point, he felt a small hand slip into his. Emily looked up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. "Are we really fixing things?" she asked in a whisper. "For everybody?" Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "We're trying," he answered honestly. "It's a start." Olivia joined them, pride evident in her expression as she surveyed the animated conversations happening throughout the room. "You did this," she said quietly to Nathan. He shook his head. "We did this. All of us." He gestured to the room at large, then more specifically to her and Emily. You two especially. You showed me what was possible when people look out for each other. I thought I was the cynical one, Olivia teased, bumping her shoulder against his. Their relationship had deepened over the months, moving cautiously but steadily from friendship to something more. Nathan had become a fixture in their lives, still maintaining his own apartment, but spending most evenings at Olivia's, helping Emily with homework, sharing meals, gradually building a life that intertwined with theirs. They had both been careful, aware of Emily's attachment and their own still healing hearts, but the connection between them had proved resilient, grounded in mutual respect and shared purpose. As the meeting continued, a local journalist who had been invited to cover the initiative approached them, notebook in hand. "So you're the ones who started all this?" she asked, glancing between Nathan and Olivia. "Would you be willing to share your story? How this all began?" Nathan looked to Olivia, leaving the decision to her. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "It started with a loaf of bread and a carton of milk," she began, her voice steady as she recounted that rainy morning at Barton's bakery. As she spoke, Nathan watched the journalist's expression shift from professional interest to genuine engagement. This was the power of their story, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so ordinary. A moment of need, a small act of kindness, and the unexpected changes that had flowed from it. When the meeting finally concluded, Nathan, Olivia, and Emily walked home together through streets that somehow felt different now, more familiar, more connected, as if the conversations in that church basement had physically altered the landscape of their neighborhood. "Do you think it will last?" Olivia asked as they stopped at a crosswalk, Emily skipping ahead a few steps. "All of this energy, these connections?" Nathan considered the question seriously. "I don't know," he admitted. "Change is hard, and systems have a way of pushing back. But I think we've started something real here, something that meets an actual need, and that gives it staying power." Emily turned back to them, her face alight with the particular wisdom of childhood. "If it doesn't last, we'll just start again," she said matter-of-factly. "That's what you always tell me, Mum. If something's important, you keep trying." Olivia laughed, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," Emily replied with a grin. "You just weren't paying attention." As they continued walking, Nathan felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. The grief that had once defined his days hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, making room for new connections, new purpose. In helping Olivia and Emily, he had somehow helped himself find a way forward, not by escaping his past, but by building something meaningful from it. And as they approached Olivia's apartment building, the three of them walking in comfortable proximity under the glow of street lamps, Nathan realized that in this quiet moment of ordinary beauty, he had found something he'd thought lost forever: the feeling of coming home. The headline in the local newspaper read, "Neighborhood Creates Economic Safety Net," accompanied by a photo of Nathan, Olivia, and several other community members standing outside Barton's bakery. The article detailed their grassroots initiative, quoting both Nathan and Olivia extensively about the philosophy behind the Community Tab program and its expansion throughout the neighborhood. Nathan read it over breakfast in Olivia's kitchen, Emily peering over his shoulder with undisguised pride. "We're famous," she declared, pointing to her own small mention in the article as one of the young people who had started a parallel program at her school where students could share supplies and snacks with classmates who needed them. "Hardly famous," Olivia corrected with a laugh, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs. "But it's nice to see good news in the paper for once." Nathan couldn't disagree. In a media landscape often dominated by crisis and conflict, there was something refreshing about seeing their small efforts recognized. The journalist had captured the essence of what they were trying to do, not creating charity, but building solidarity. Not offering handouts, but constructing a network of mutual support that recognized everyone's dignity and everyone's need for connection. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Have you seen it?" It was from Gerald Barton, who had gradually transformed from skeptic to reluctant participant to, surprisingly, one of the most vocal advocates for the Community Tab program. The bakery owner had discovered an unexpected talent for organization, using his business connections to bring more local establishments into the network. "Just reading it now," Nathan texted back. "They did a good job." 3 dots appeared. "Then stop by the bakery later. Have something to discuss." Nathan raised an eyebrow at the cryptic message, but set his phone aside as Emily launched into an elaborate plan for her school's expansion of their sharing program. His meeting with Gerald would have to wait. Saturday mornings were reserved for Emily's projects, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them. Later that afternoon, after helping Emily design posters for her initiative, Nathan made his way to Barton's Bakery. The small chalkboard advertising the Community Tab had evolved into a more elaborate display, complete with a running tally of contributions and a list of local resources for those in need. Gerald was behind the counter, his customary flour-dusted apron in place as he arranged pastries in the display case. "Reynolds," he greeted Nathan with a nod. "Good article." "Thanks," Nathan replied. "Though it made it sound more organized than it really is. We're still figuring a lot of this out as we go." Gerald grunted in acknowledgement. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." He gestured toward a table in the corner, wiping his hands on his apron. "Got a minute?" They sat and Gerald pushed a folder across the table. "Been thinking about how to make this more sustainable. The Community Tab works great, but it's still reliant on individual goodwill, which can fluctuate. I've been working on a more structured approach." Nathan opened the folder to find a business plan for what Gerald was calling a community trust, a formalized version of their ad hoc network, complete with a rotating fund that local businesses would contribute to, which could then be accessed by residents facing financial hardship. "You drew up a business plan?" Nathan asked, genuinely impressed by the detailed financial projections and governance structure. Gerald shrugged, but Nathan could detect a hint of pride beneath the bakery owner's gruff exterior. "I've been running a successful business for 20 years. Figured those skills might be useful for something beyond selling bread." "This is incredible," Nathan said, flipping through the pages. "But why show it to me first? Why not bring it to the next community meeting?" Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "Wanted your opinion. This was your idea initially, after all." The admission that Nathan's intervention had sparked something meaningful was delivered so matter-of-factly that Nathan almost missed its significance. He studied the older man across the table, recognizing the subtle shift that had occurred over the months. Gerald Barton was still a businessman first and foremost, still concerned with efficiency and the bottom line, but he had reconnected with something essential that had perhaps been dormant, a sense of responsibility toward the community that sustained his business. "I think it's brilliant," Nathan said honestly, "and I think you should present it at the next meeting. This kind of structure is exactly what we need to make the initiative last beyond the initial enthusiasm." Gerald nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. That's settled then." He stood, ready to return to work, then paused. "You know, Reynolds, I didn't think much of you that first day. Thought you were just another bleeding heart trying to make yourself feel good by handing out charity." "And now?" Nathan asked, curious despite himself. A rare smile tugged at the corner of Gerald's mouth. "Now I think you might have been onto something after all. Don't let it go to your head." With that, he returned to the counter, leaving Nathan sitting with the business plan and a growing sense that the ripples from that rainy morning encounter were continuing to spread in ways he could never have anticipated. When he arrived back at Olivia's apartment that evening, he found her on the couch with a laptop, scrolling through emails with a furrowed brow. "Everything okay?" he asked, settling beside her. "I don't know," she replied, turning the screen toward him. "I got this from Dr. Harrison at Mount Sinai, the one who's been treating Emily. He saw the article and wants to meet with us about some new research program they're developing for juvenile arthritis. Something about comprehensive family support alongside medical treatment." Nathan skimmed the email, noting the doctor's enthusiasm and specific mention of their community initiative as aligning with the hospital's new approach to chronic childhood conditions. "This sounds promising," he said cautiously. aware of how protective Olivia was when it came to Emily's medical care. "What are you thinking?" Olivia closed the laptop, leaning back with a sigh. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago, I could barely afford Emily's basic medication, let alone participate in some cutting-edge research program. I'm thinking that so much has changed so quickly that sometimes I'm afraid to believe it's real." Nathan understood her wariness. The improvements in their circumstances had been gradual, but significant. Nathan's design business had picked up, allowing him to share resources more consistently. The community network had provided practical support in countless small ways. Olivia herself had been able to increase her hours at the hospital, with Nathan and their growing circle of neighborhood connections helping with Emily's care. But beneath these practical improvements lay something more profound, a shift from isolation to connection, from scarcity to sufficiency, from surviving to beginning to thrive. "It is real," Nathan said softly, taking her hand, "not because of luck or magic, but because we built it, all of us together, and whatever comes next, we'll face it the same way." Olivia squeezed his hand, her expression softening. "When did you become such an optimist?" Nathan laughed. "I think it was around the time a certain 9-year-old told me her theory about how kindness is contagious like chickenpox, only you don't need calamine lotion afterward." "Emily and her theories," Olivia said with a fond shake of her head. "Speaking of whom, she asked me something interesting today." "Oh?" "She wanted to know if you were ever going to live with us for real, instead of just staying over all the time." Nathan felt his heart skip a beat. They hadn't discussed this. Specifically, though he'd been spending more and more time at their apartment, his own place feeling increasingly like a storage unit rather than a home. "What did you tell her?" he asked carefully. "I told her that was a conversation you and I needed to have together." Olivia looked at him directly, her expression open but guarded. "So, is that something you've thought about?" Nathan had thought about little else recently. "Yes," he admitted, "but I wasn't sure if you were ready for that step. I know how important your independence is to you, how hard you've worked to build a stable life for you and Emily." "It is important," Olivia acknowledged. "But so is this, what we've created together. And maybe there's a way to have both, to be independent and interdependent at the same time." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The past few years, I've been so focused on just keeping our heads above water that I couldn't see beyond the next crisis, the next bill. But lately I've started to imagine a future again. And you're in it, Nathan, you and me and Emily, building something lasting." The simple honesty of her words touched something deep in Nathan's heart. She wasn't offering a fairy tale ending, a magical resolution to all life's complications. She was offering something far more valuable, a partnership, a shared journey through whatever lay ahead. "I'd like that," he said softly, "to build a future together, all three of us." As they sat there on the couch, plans and possibilities unfurling between them, Nathan thought about the strange winding path that had led him to this moment. How grief had nearly consumed him, how a chance encounter in a bakery had awakened him to the world again, how in reaching out to help another, he had somehow found his way back to himself. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. Emily's condition would have good days and bad. Financial pressures wouldn't disappear overnight. The community initiative would face resistance and setbacks. Their relationship would encounter its own tests and tensions. But sitting there with Olivia, discussing their shared future with quiet hope, Nathan knew with bone-deep certainty that they would face whatever came next together. Not just the two of them, but the growing circle of connection they had helped to create, a living testament to the power of small acts of kindness, to transform not just individual lives but entire communities. The transformation of Nathan's relationship with Olivia and Emily mirrored the transformation happening in their neighborhood. From strangers to neighbors, from isolation to community, from scarcity to abundance, created not through economic miracles but through the revolutionary act of people choosing to share resources and support one another through difficult times. Time seemed to accelerate after that evening conversation. Within a month, Nathan had given notice on his apartment, moved his belongings into Olivia's place, and they had begun the process of looking for a slightly larger apartment that could comfortably accommodate the three of them. Emily had thrown herself into the project with characteristic enthusiasm, creating elaborate drawings of her ideal bedroom and compiling lists of requirements that ranged from practical, close to my school, to fantastical, a secret passage to Narnia. The community initiative continued to grow as well. Gerald Barton had presented his community trust proposal at the next meeting, where it had been received with enthusiasm and immediately implemented. Other neighborhoods had begun reaching out, curious about how they might replicate the model. A local foundation had offered a small grant to help formalize some aspects of the program, with Nathan and Olivia among those asked to serve on the advisory board. And through it all, their little family unit had solidified, not without bumps and adjustments, but with a steady commitment to building something meaningful together. It was on a bright September morning, nearly a year after their first meeting at the bakery, that Nathan stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, a modest two-bedroom on the third floor of a building just a few blocks from Emily's school, making pancakes, while Emily set the table and Olivia prepared for a meeting with Dr. Harrison about the new research program. "Do you think Dr. Harrison will let me join the swimming part of the program?" Emily asked, carefully arranging the silverware. The experimental treatment combined traditional medication with physical therapy, including pool exercises specifically designed for children with juvenile arthritis. "I hope so, sweetie," Olivia replied, gathering her notes. "That's one of the things we're discussing today." "Swimming would be so much better than those stretches I have to do," Emily declared. "Plus, Danny from my class is in the program already, and she says they give you a cool special swimsuit." Nathan flipped a pancake, smiling at Emily's enthusiasm. Her condition had been relatively stable in recent months, with fewer flare-ups and better mobility, though they all knew the unpredictable nature of the disease meant this could change at any time. Still, the comprehensive approach of the new treatment program combined with the reduced stress in their household seemed to be having a positive effect. "Special swimsuit or not, you still have to eat breakfast before school," Nathan reminded her, sliding a plate of pancakes onto the table. "These have blueberries in them. Brain food for your math test." Emily groaned theatrically. "I forgot. About the test. Can I stay home instead?" "Nice try," Olivia laughed, dropping a kiss on her daughter's head. "You've been practicing all week. You'll do fine." As they sat down to breakfast together, Nathan felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. This ordinary morning routine, pancakes, school preparations, gentle teasing, had become the foundation of his days, infusing them with a purpose and joy he had thought lost forever after Sarah's death. Grief still visited him sometimes, unexpected. Moments when a song or a scent would bring Sarah vividly to mind. Moments when he wished she could see the life he was building now. But increasingly, those moments came without the crushing weight of despair that had once accompanied them. Instead, they carried a bittersweet acknowledgement of all he had loved and lost, alongside gratitude for the new love that had unexpectedly entered his life. "Hearth to Nathan," Olivia's voice broke into his thoughts. "You're burning the pancakes." He startled, quickly flipping the slightly too brown pancake and adding it to the stack. "Sorry," got lost in thought. "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" Emily asked, her perception sometimes startling in its accuracy. Nathan smiled at her. "Good thoughts, very good thoughts." After breakfast, they parted ways for the day. Emily to school, Olivia to her meeting at the hospital, and Nathan to the community center, where he was helping to set up a new computer lab, another offshoot of their growing network of neighborhood resources. As he kissed them both goodbye at the door, Nathan was struck by how seamlessly they had become a family, not replacing what had been lost, but creating something new and equally precious. "See you tonight," Olivia said, her hand lingering on his arm. "Family dinner at Gerald's, remember?" Nathan nodded. In one of life's more surprising developments, Gerald Barton had become something of a friend, hosting monthly dinners for key participants in the community initiative. His wife, Eleanor, had emerged from the background of the bakery operations to become a central figure in the network, her warm personality balancing Gerald's more brusque approach. "Wouldn't miss it," Nathan assured her. And good luck with Dr. Harrison. Call me after." Olivia promised she would, and they parted ways, each heading into a day filled with purpose and connection. A far cry from where they had been when they first met, isolated in their separate struggles. As Nathan walked to the community center, he found himself reflecting on the journey of the past year. That rainy morning in the bakery seemed simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. So much had changed, not just in his personal circumstances or Olivia and Emily's, but in the fabric of the neighborhood itself. The community they were building wasn't perfect. There were still economic hardships, still systems that created barriers rather than bridges. But they had created something meaningful in the midst of those challenges, a network of mutual support that recognized everyone's inherent dignity and everyone's occasional need for help. And in doing so, they had discovered a profound truth, that the path from surviving to thriving wasn't found in isolation or self-sufficiency, but in the radical act of showing up for one another, day after day, in ways both large and small. That true resilience wasn't about never needing help, but about being embedded in a community where asking for and offering support were equally valued. As he approached the community center, Nathan saw a group of volunteers already gathered outside, ready to help set up the computer lab that would provide internet access, technology training, and job search resources to neighborhood residents. Among them were faces that had become familiar over the months: the bookstore owner, the young mother from Olivia's building, the elderly carpenter, all there to contribute what they could to their shared vision. Nathan greeted them with a wave, quickening his pace to join them. They had work to do, this improvised family of neighbors united by nothing more complicated and nothing more revolutionary than the simple belief that they belonged to one another, that their individual fates were inextricably connected, and that in that connection lay their greatest strength and their truest hope for the future. The August heat hung heavy in the air as Nathan, Olivia, and Emily made their way to the neighborhood park, where crowds had already gathered for the one-year anniversary celebration of their community initiative. What had begun as a simple act in a bakery had evolved into a vibrant network of mutual aid, transforming not just individual lives, but the character of the neighborhood itself. Tables lined the perimeter of the park, each representing a different aspect of their growing program. The Community Trust Table, staffed by Gerald Barton and several local business owners. The Resource Directory, now expanded into a comprehensive guidebook and website. The Childcare Cooperative, which had grown to include after-school activities and summer programming. The Time Bank, where neighbors could exchange skills and services without money changing hands. At the center of it all was a large banner reading, "1 Year of Neighborly Connection," illustrated with a beautiful mural painted by children from Emily's school. Beneath it, a simple timeline charted the growth of their initiative, beginning with a photograph of Barton's Bakery and that first community tab chalkboard. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Olivia said, adjusting the stack of flyers she was carrying. Information about the newest addition to their network, a healthcare advocacy program inspired in part by her own struggles navigating the medical system for Emily's condition. "In some ways, yes," Nathan agreed, helping Emily carry the container of homemade cookies they'd baked for the celebration. "In other ways, it feels like we've always been doing this." Emily, now 10 and experiencing a good period with her arthritis, bounded ahead of them, eager to join the other children who had already claimed the playground. "Can I go play, Mum? I promise to be careful with my knees." Olivia nodded, watching, as her daughter ran off, so different from the shy, often pained child of a year ago. The new treatment program had been helping, certainly, but so had the reduced stress in their household, the stable housing, the consistent support network that allowed both Olivia and Emily to focus on thriving rather than merely surviving. As they made their way through the crowd, they were stopped repeatedly by neighbors wanting to chat, to share stories, to express gratitude, or offer new ideas. Nathan knew most of them now, not just by face but by name, by circumstance, by the unique gifts and challenges they brought to the community. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, who had started the neighborhood garden on a vacant lot, Jason Kim, a college student who coordinated the tutoring program, Aisha Washington, who had expanded the community tab concept to her hair salon, offering free services to those preparing for job interviews or special occasions. "Nathan, Olivia," a voice called out to them from near the main table. It was the journalist who had written the original article about their initiative, now a regular at their community meetings. "I was hoping to catch you. The piece I wrote about you guys is being picked up by some larger outlets. There's interest in your model from neighborhoods across the city." This was welcome news, if somewhat overwhelming. They'd already been fielding inquiries from other communities interested in replicating aspects of their program, leading to occasional weekend trips to share what they'd learned, always with an emphasis on adapting the concepts to each neighborhood's specific needs and strengths rather than imposing a standardized approach. "That's wonderful," Olivia said. Though Nathan could detect a hint of trepidation in her voice, she had always been more cautious about the growing attention, protective of the organic, community-driven nature of what they'd built. The journalist seemed to sense her hesitation. "Don't worry, I've emphasized that this isn't a top-down program. It's about communities finding their own solutions, with your model as inspiration rather than prescription." Nathan nodded appreciatively. "That's exactly right. What works here might not work everywhere. The principles are universal, but the implementation has to be local." They chatted a bit longer before continuing through the celebration, eventually finding a spot under a large oak tree where they could watch the festivities unfold. All around them, neighbors who had once been strangers to each other were connecting, sharing food, swapping stories, letting their children play together. The invisible walls that had separated them, built of economic disparity and social division, hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had become more permeable, more frequently bridged, by gestures both practical and kind. "We did this," Olivia said softly, leaning against Nathan's shoulder as they watched Emily play a game of tag with a diverse group of children. "Actually did it." "We all did," Nathan corrected gently, putting his arm around her. "That's the whole point, isn't it? None of us could have done it alone." Olivia smiled up at him, the late afternoon sun catching the silver strand in her dark hair that he had come to love. "True, but it started with you, that day in the bakery, standing up when it would have been easier to look away." Nathan shook his head. "It started with you, actually, having the courage to keep going even when everything was stacked against you. I just happened to be there at the right moment." "Either way," Olivia conceded, "I'm glad we found each other. Not just for what we've built here," she gestured to the celebration around them, "but for us, for our family." Family. The word still filled Nathan with a quiet wonder. After Sarah died, he had resigned himself to a solitary future, certain that the capacity for that kind of connection had died with her. How wrong he had been, not because his love for Sarah had diminished, but because the heart, he had discovered, was capable of expanding in ways he had never imagined. "Me too," he said simply, drawing Olivia closer. As the celebration continued around them, Nathan reflected on the strange, winding path that had led him to this moment, from the depths of grief to the gradual reawakening of purpose, from the simple act of paying for bread and milk to the complex community-wide network that had grown from that seed, from solitary suffering to a connection so deep and true that it had fundamentally altered his understanding of what it meant to heal, to belong, to build a meaningful life amid uncertainty. "Nathan," Emily called, running toward them with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. "Come play with us. We need one more person for our team." Nathan looked to Olivia, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, I'll hold our spot." As he jogged after Emily to join the game forming on the open grass, Nathan felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Not just for Olivia and Emily, though they were at the center of his newfound joy, but for all of it, the whole messy, beautiful tapestry of connection they had woven together, thread by thread, day by day. The game was a simple one, a version of Capture the Flag that the children had modified with their own elaborate rules. As Nathan took his place on Emily's team, he caught sight of Olivia watching from beneath the oak tree, her expression one of quiet contentment. Beside her, Gerald Barton had stopped to chat, the unlikely friendship between them another small miracle in a year filled with them. And as the game began, children's laughter rising into the warm summer air, Nathan knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this community, this family they had found and built and chosen was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of one. A journey of continuing to discover day by day how the smallest gestures of kindness and connection could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. How in reaching out to others, we find our truest selves, and how even in a world that so often seems designed to divide and isolate, the human capacity for compassion and solidarity remains our most powerful resource, an endless wellspring, from which all may drink, and in doing so find themselves renewed,